It's good to be with you all again today. I was hoping to use one of my favorite Lord of the Rings lines about knowing only half of you half as well as I should like, but I think I know more than half of you, more than half as well as I should like. How about that? For the handful of you who don't know, yep, my name is Jeremiah. For about almost 4 years, served alongside Pastor Patton and the rest of the elders here, and it was a great privilege. And then at the end of 2023, our family was asked to move to Philadelphia, and I was asked to take up a leadership position in our home missions department of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. And so we've been there now for almost 3 years. Well, we've been working in that role for almost 3 years. We've lived in the Philadelphia area now for a little more than 2 years. And let me tell you, I travel around the country and I drive in a lot of cities, and I think Philadelphia has the most aggressive traffic of any place that I've driven, including Los Angeles. Like, it's easier in LA than it is in Philadelphia. So we've been there for about 2 years, and we're a part of a church in that area. Did you guys attend Cornerstone when you were in Philly, or you were at Calvary? Okay, you're at Calvary. So we attend a little OP church called Cornerstone, where I also serve as sort of a part-time, as available second pastor alongside of our full-time minister there. But our main call now for almost 3 years has been, I serve with the Committee on Home Missions and Church Extension. And if you try to make that into an acronym, it becomes this sort of adventure. Like, how do you pronounce it? CHMCE. Some people say kimchi, like the Korean food. You're missing an H there. Some people say chimcha, and you're adding an H. Some people say chimka, which I guess is the most phonetic, but also the weirdest. And I just say home missions. But the name is meaningful because we are not want to be halfway in our evangelistic efforts as a church. The first part of our name, home missions, that really signifies the work of evangelism. We want to be used by God to make new Christians. That's what every Christian should want. We should all want to be used by God to make new Christians, that God would make new Christians through us. So that's the home missions part of our name. The church extension part of our name, though, is just as important, because when somebody becomes a believer, the worst thing in the world would be to just throw them off on their own. Go be blessed. It's like cutting off your arm and laying it on the street. What's going to happen? The arm will die and you will bleed. So when somebody becomes a believer, we really want them as soon as possible to be integrated into a healthy, faithful community of Christians. And so our mission in OPC Home Missions is not just to be used by God to make new Christians, but then also to be used by God to organize new communities of Christians, new congregations, new churches, new local churches. And so home missions, the work of evangelism, church extension, church planting. And then also very important for us is that the first word in our name is committee. We are servants, we are not masters. Sometimes I have heard people joke, or not so much joke, about the so-called OPC federal government in Philadelphia. I can tell you, we don't have that kind of power. I have no power to come into a local church or even a local presbytery and tell them what to do. I may have a wonderful plan for church planting in the Presbytery of Ohio. I can't make the Presbytery of Ohio plant a church anywhere. We just don't have that power. We support the church. Our denomination is not a top-heavy ecclesiastical dictatorship. We serve local churches. We serve regional churches. And our mission, as we understand it, is to support the denomination all over the country in doing two things: reaching the lost and then welcoming the found. Being used by God to bring new people, new souls to Christ, but then also recognizing that many souls, even many people who either already are converted or maybe think they're converted, really have been under-discipled. They have not been taught, they have not been discipled, sometimes even in the basics. And so we want to be used to welcome them. In the last 10 years or so, Americans like statistics, so I like statistics. I speak Excel. And I could get really nerdy there, but I'll just not. In the last 10 years, OPC Home Missions, our denomination's committee, we've been privileged to financially support in other ways about 60 new mission works. Over the last 10 years, our denomination, We're a small denomination, by the way. Does anybody know how many congregations we have total, including mission works and organized churches? So Covenant is an organized church, Bread of Life is a mission work, but you count all those together, how many do we have total? 300. About 350 now, close to 350, not quite 350. But over the last 10 years, we've tried to plant about 60, and about 3/4 of those are still open today. So we're batting about 750. That might sound good, and as a baseball batting average, that would be extraordinary. We would like that to be higher, of course. Ideally, 100%. Realistically, 80%. So we're not quite where we'd like to be. Sometimes congregations just don't take, new church plants, they just don't work out. People move away, for work or schooling. But we would like to see that viability rate at about 80%. We're about 75% right now. But the number of church plants in our denomination continues to grow year by year. In 2022, so 4 years ago, about 1 out of every 10 congregations in the OPC was a church plant. 2023, it actually went over that number, more than 10%. And as of the end of last year, as the end of 2025, we had 297 established congregations and 43 mission works, which means 12.5%, more than 12.5%. So on any given Sunday, when you think about the OPC gathering for worship across the country, more than 12% of those congregations are mission works. And that's really important to remember that stat, because sometimes you hear the joke that Presbyterians are sort of the frozen chosen, right? And there's a sense in which that can be really funny. Like, have you ever seen the fake headline where it says Presbyterian congregation accidentally wins mannequin challenge in church because they're all sitting still? If that's what you mean by frozen chosen, then I'll just laugh with you, because we're a little more restrained in our mannerisms. But if you take that to mean that Presbyterians don't care about evangelism or that we don't care about mission, it's completely false. And our small denomination, and we are small compared to others, we've been very aggressive in church planting from the very beginning. In fact, our denomination was really founded over a concern for the lost being reached with the gospel. A lot of times when people think about the origin story of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, they think about the 1920s, and they think about this conflict, a pamphlet war, and then it spilled out into the churches and newspapers, what they call the fundamentalist modernist controversy. How many of you have heard about this? Some of you have. A couple years ago, I think we touched on it briefly in a Sunday school here. And so there was a concern really around the turn of the 20th century, the 1910s, 1920s, leading into the 30s. Almost all of the mainline big denominations in the United States were being infected with this false teaching. They wouldn't leave the church, but pastors and leaders were increasingly saying, well, the basics of the Bible are basically optional. You don't have to believe all of those things, the things that the church has always believed. And we're not talking about minor questions like who wrote the letter to Hebrews. We're talking about big questions like, is Jesus God? Did Jesus literally rise from the dead? And a lot of the leadership in those main denominations was getting corrupted, and those who still believed the gospel, they were labeled fundamentalists, but really they were just historic Orthodox Christians, were standing up and saying, you can't teach this. Or if you want to teach this, go plant your own atheist churches. So one of our leaders in that time was a guy named J. Gresham Machen. And so normally when we think about the founding of the OPC, we think about that conflict, the conflict between true and false teaching. But there's a story under the story. How did that controversy get started? What alerted guys like Machen and others to the fact that this problem was happening? It was actually first detected on the foreign missions field, where it became that they found out that people that were being sent as foreign missionaries were not actually telling lost people to believe in Jesus. They were telling them, well, just be a good Buddhist, be a good Confucius. And so it was a concern that our forefathers are finding out that on the foreign missions field, we're sending people to talk to very lost people, and they're not actually giving them good news. So the story under the story, the reason that conflict happened is because underneath there was a fundamental concern that the lost were not being reached with the gospel of Jesus Christ. In the early decades of our denomination, we were aggressively evangelistic. The OPC was organized in what year? Who knows? 1936 is when the first General Assembly happened. So this is our 90th anniversary. What also was happening in the late 30s, in the mid to late 30s in our society? The Great Depression, right? So our denomination started at a time when they were dirt poor. And so early home missionaries, early foreign missionaries, we would promise to pay them a certain amount, like try to support them. You know, the whopping sum of like $100 a month. That's not a lot of money, even then. But because our denomination was so poor, and at that point they were sort of centrally funding all of the home missionaries and foreign missionaries, there were times when contributions just weren't there. And they were getting 50 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar. But they pressed on because they cared about sharing the gospel on the home and foreign mission field. This is our legacy, this passion for evangelism at home and abroad. This is the early DNA of our denomination. Now, things changed a little bit in the 1980s and 90s. There were some other denominations that were starting to crumble, and so large groups of people were coming out of those denominations to the OPC and saying, hey, we want to be OPC churches. And so the department that I serve, home missions, they were basically playing catch, and it was a lot of work just to catch all the people that were coming to them. And so during that time, the emphasis switched a little bit from reaching brand new people with the gospel. Not that it was ever forgotten, but the emphasis came on sort of catching these people that needed a home. That was something, that's how I grew up. When I was growing up in this denomination, that was sort of the default church planting mode. And is it a good thing to welcome people who need a church home?
Yes.
Of course, right. But we also don't want to lose those muscles, those desire to see brand new people reached with the gospel. My mom and dad came into the OPC from a different Christian tradition, and they certainly were fed and discipled much better in our denomination than they were elsewhere. But my mom and dad, even if they had never found the OPC, were already going to go to heaven. They were already Christians. And so as a denomination, we can never be content with just saying, we're just going to welcome people. We never want to get into the mindset, well, we'll let them get converted in other churches, and when they grow up, when they go to graduate school, then we'll find them. That can't be satisfactory. There are lost people all over the world, and even in your own community, that need to know Jesus. And even some of the people that you might write off that think they won't want anything to do with Christ are actually very curious about the gospel and about Jesus. In our church in Philadelphia, there is a lady who works for the American Bible Society. How many of you have heard of this? They don't just print Bibles. In fact, I think they do a little less of that now than they used to, because there are so many Bible publishers out there. But they do a lot of research, a lot of statistical surveys. And at the end of 2024, I get a copy of their research every year. There are some benefits to living in Philly. But one of the things that came out at the end of 2024, they were just breaking down groups that they'd surveyed, and they said they had this really interesting stat from the group of people that identify as none, N-O-N-E-S. Who knows what that is? If somebody says, I'm a nun, what does that mean, Betty? Right. I do not identify with any organized expression of religion, period. Not just Christian, but anything. Like, I am not formally religious. Now, that seems like a pretty aggressive posture, right? You think, well, somebody who identifies as none probably doesn't want anything to do with me talking spiritual. But actually, it's not true at all. Of that group, of the ones that they surveyed, 35%, so more than 1 out of 3, said that they were either curious about Jesus or maybe even committed to him. Now, you're going to scratch your head and say, how can a person be committed to Jesus and not identify as a Christian or not identify as part of a church tradition? That's a great question. Wouldn't it be fun to have that conversation? My point is, the people that we think are unreachable or that have pushed us away, many of them are actually very open. So we don't want to write them off. And home missions as a denomination is part of what we do, is we come around and remind you of those stats, right, and try to encourage you in the work of evangelism. We do a lot of work, though, for the church. When you think, it's probably greater or lesser degree of familiarity with what we do. So when you think of, okay, the denomination's home missions committee, what are some things that you think we do? Anybody have any thoughts? Yes, Dan.
Putting on conferences and
Say that again?
Putting on conferences and training.
Right. That's one of the things we do. We do training and recruiting. Right. So we go visit seminaries and we talk to seminary students. In fact, next week I'm going to Greenville, South Carolina. I've got a dozen seminary students that want to hang out and talk about OPC ministry. Will all 12 of them end up in our denomination? I don't know, but we'll see. We also train people that are already church planters. Whenever a church plant is on our support program, twice during that 4 years, we will bring the church planter and his wife to a retreat that we do in the summer. We just had it 2 weeks ago, at this time in Portland, Maine, where we give them some training on personal evangelism, some training on gospel preaching. Also, one of the things I have to talk to the pastors about every year is just sustainable ministry rhythms, how not to burn out in ministry. That's a very important part. So we do training. We also train at the regional level. Most presbyteries in our denomination, most regions, have a point man, one or two regional home missionaries that are responsible to sort of be the point person for church planting across the whole region. We get together with them in November once a year to encourage them, to give them some training, get them talking. So yes, we do training and conferences. What else do we do? Go ahead, Scott.
Source of funding for new mission works.
That's right. So one of the things for which we're most well known is we provide financing, and we have a strategic model for financing church plants. If a regional church, like let's say the Ohio Presbytery, comes and says we want to plant a new church, we say, okay, we can provide 4 years of funding on a declining scale, the most up front, and then a little less, and then a little less, and then a little less, because hopefully the church is growing. And so as our support begins to decline, local giving is supposed to increase, God willing, and those lines cross, the church becomes self-sustaining. We also now require presbyteries to put in an investment too. So if we're putting in $1, we ask them to put in 50 cents. Most of our new church plants, we put in a little over $40,000 in the first year. We ask the presbyteries to put in half as much so that the church plant starts with a strong financial basis. Why is that so important? We are a small denomination, but one of the things we've been committed to from the beginning as much as possible is we don't want either our home missionaries or our foreign missionaries to have to raise their own support. We want them to be able to focus on preaching and prayer and people, the work of the ministry. And so as a denomination, the rest of us who are not doing that stuff week in and week out, we give, we sacrifice, we contribute so that they can be freed up. So that's very important to us. So yes, we do a lot of financial support. We spend probably more than $1 million a year supporting church plants around the country. What else do you think of when you think of OPC home missions? Go ahead, Anna, in the back.
Printed materials.
Yeah, so printed materials, right. So Anna is very interested in this, and so am I, because I like to write and she likes to do graphic design. And so we try to print evangelistic and discipleship resources. So we've done this for years. This is not anything new with the OPC, but one of the things that we've been working on in recent years, since I became I have a really funny title. I forgot, you forgot to share that. Yeah, so I'll make the joke after I give you the title. The title that I have, it's General Secretary. Now that sounds really weird, doesn't it? It is a weird title, for sure. In the early 20th century, when the OPC started, a lot of missionary organizations or ministry organizations were led by general secretaries. InterVarsity was led by a general secretary. So it wasn't weird 100 years ago. Nowadays, do you know which organizations still use the term general secretary for their leaders? International Communist Parties, yeah. So, I mean, I've been called worse, but that's not a great association. So maybe in the future we can convince the denomination to change those titles. But since I became General Secretary, we've been working to try to make, not just keep some existing evangelistic literature in print, but also build some more bridges, make some more accessible resources. So we've had tracts in English for years, but when I became General Secretary, we started also producing some, not a huge number, but a small number of them in Spanish and in Mandarin, Chinese. Why are we doing that? Because we have increasing ministry opportunities as a denomination with those language groups. And over in Springfield, it's that way. There's an OPC church, Living Water, that not only has a college ministry to the campus, but also has a Hispanic church meeting under the same roof. right? And so they need evangelistic resources too. So we're printing a subset of our evangelistic literature now in Spanish and then in Mandarin Chinese. Not a lot of Mandarin Chinese ministry in Southwest Ohio for the OPC, but in Seattle and in other places, there's an increasing opportunity there, Southern California. So we want to serve that demographic as well of our church. But we've also been producing new resources in English. And so one of the evangelistic tracts that we've produced came out last year that I had the privilege to write, and Anna did the design here. It's called Life Without Pretending. Some of you have seen this, maybe? It's a shorter evangelistic tract. We've realized how many of you like to read books? I love to read books. You realize that fewer and fewer people like to read, right? There's something called the TLDR phenomenon, too long didn't read. Have you heard that? I think it's tragic, but I'm a nerd. But recognizing that longer written materials just won't be read, we said we got to start producing some evangelistic material that's in a shorter form. And so when we sat down to work on this tract, we said it's got to be under 700 words. I think it weighs in around 630. It's also written not so much with a little less philosophical emphasis and a little more testimonial emphasis. So it starts out, so that the subtitle is Why I Am Still a Christian. And that's a little bit of a teaser for how this starts. It starts out by saying, this is the first sentence, I am not a Christian because it's easy. Okay. Next paragraph, I'm not a Christian because I understand everything in the Bible. Third paragraph, I'm not a Christian because the church or other Christians have never hurt me. And then the question is, well, why am I still a Christian? And it goes on to say, I follow Jesus because I'm convinced he tells the truth. Unpacks that. Jesus doesn't just tell the truth, he is the truth. It unpacks that. Jesus reveals God's astonishing goodness. Unpacks that and goes on. And finally, it concludes with, I follow Jesus because he's given me a new life, a life without pretending. So it's written with more of a testimonial tone. It's shorter. It's the kind of book you could give to somebody on the airplane or at a park. That's one of the things we've been excited about, and Anna did the design for that, so you can see we've upped our game in terms of audio design. People say, wow, your tracks look really good. I say, yeah, I know a person. I got a guy, again a gal, in Dayton, because Dale helps as well. Another resource that it's going to be coming off the press just in a couple weeks. It's not available yet. I wish I had been able to have a copy to show you. We're in conversations with the printer right now, getting a quote to print this. It's going to be more of a half-sheet size, and it's called Good News for All People. Now, many of you know that our church has a catechism. We have a shorter catechism and a larger catechism. And those are wonderful resources. They're like single malt distilled theology. Very, very precise, very elegant. They're also written in 16th century, 17th century Elizabethan English, so they're not as accessible. And so actually the origin of this project, Good News for All People, came when I was serving as a pastor here. I don't remember the names, and I wouldn't say that even if I do, but several years ago, we had a family that were members here. They eventually moved on because of his naval assignment. But they had some friends that moved into the area. Some of you remember this? And that family was completely unchurched, no church background. But our members helped them relocate and get a new start here. And I helped them move in the first day. Many of you did. A lot of us were involved. And just in the course of chatting with them, not only are they unchurched, but they don't really like to read. And I know that our friends who are members here were planning to try to get them to attend worship and hopefully stick with our church. And so I started to think, if I had the opportunity to just introduce these people to the faith, what would I use? I love the shorter catechism. I memorized it as a younger man, as we encouraged all the young people here to do. But I realized that for people that don't read, the shorter catechism is going to be too hard. And so I thought, what if we had a resource like a catechism, question and answer format, that was almost no Christianese, very, very accessible language. If we have to use a theological word, we'll make sure we define it in simple language. And what if it, instead of being 107 questions like the shorter catechism, what if it were 30 or 31 questions? So the idea is one question a day, even if you're not a reader. If you would read one question and answer a day for a month with a couple Bible verses that went with each question, in that format, could we create an overview of the Christian faith? And so that was the project. That was the thing that eventually became Good News for All People. In God's providence, that family didn't stick around. Some of you remember they worshiped with us a couple times, decided they didn't want to be a part of our church. But the idea, I thought, was good to keep. And so I kept it. I kept working at it, tweaking it. And then I would run into people who were in situations that were like this. So a friend of mine who does homeless ministry in Southern California, OPC pastor, has an outreach there. I gave him a copy. A friend of mine who's a church planter in Oahu, Hawaii, works with a lot of unchurched people, gave him a copy. One of the elders here, Jeremy Gieslin, who's not here this morning, he's at the church plant, but he took a copy and was using it. And another elder at one of the other churches in Dayton, an old friend of mine, had an evangelistic opportunity. Somebody who was interested in knowing about Christianity, so they're seeking, in a sense, but they don't have any background. So I sent out some beta versions of this, and it was tested. The different people beta tested it, gave me feedback, integrated that feedback, and our committee is getting ready to publish it. And again, Anna did the layout. So that's coming out hopefully in the next month or so. We'll have actual printed copies. But the idea is if you had somebody who said, I might be interested in talking to you about Jesus, but I just don't have any background, where would I start? You could sit down give them a copy of this, or even sit down and work through it with them. So that's something we're excited about. Our denomination has so many resources that are sort of at the college or graduate school level. One of the things that I'm hoping to do as I serve in home missions is help build some step ladders, some steps or some handicap ramps for people that just haven't had the advantage. You don't realize, if you've grown up in a Christian home, you don't realize how much of the gospel you've just absorbed, how much of the lingo, how much of the language you understand. Even one of the things that the new resource talks about is, what is the Bible? What is the Old Testament? What is the New Testament? Why does your book have like 66 books? What does that mean? What is repentance? What does that mean? Some just basic things that many of us, we know that. I've known that since I was 5. People that are completely outside don't know those things. And so we're trying to provide a stepping stone into OPC Christian life. So that's something I'm really excited about, looking forward to seeing it in print. We've been working on that for about a year, Anna, probably in terms of just the layout and the content. So very excited about that. We also have another tract in the works. This has not yet been approved by my committee, so you probably won't see this till the end of the year, a little later. But just a basic evangelistic tract, another one this size. It won't look exactly like this. But the title is, Will You Come With Me to Heaven? Just emphasizing, again, something you could give during an outreach at the air show parade or whatever, the basic idea. The Lord Jesus wants people to come to heaven. And so giving them the gospel with that as the leading question. These are one of the things we do a lot of on the back end. One other thing we do a lot of in home missions that you don't see and you shouldn't see is we provide a lot of counsel. Just like your pastor and elders provide a lot of counseling to members of the church. Sometimes things are going well, sometimes things are going poorly. We provide, myself and my colleague, we provide a lot of counsel, spiritual counsel, mission counsel, just experience to our church planters and to our regional home missionaries. They submit reports to us every month. Any church plant that's supported by our committee needs to submit a monthly report. We don't do that because we love paperwork. Trust me on that. My inbox is an infinity machine. I don't crave more emails. But we have a stewardship from the Lord. We're supposed to be good stewards of the money that we're investing in our church plants. And one of the ways that we have an accountability measure is we read their reports. And it's not just statistical data, but we have a section where we say, tell us what's going well, tell us what's hard. And so we read over those, we pray over those, and we always reach back out to our church planters. Every church planter, every month when they send me a report, they will get a reply. And if it seems like something's going on that's really difficult, they might get a text message or a phone call. Or they might reach out to us. They know we're accessible. So we serve as, there's no official rule for this in our denomination, but we're sort of pastors to the pastors that need it. So we take that very seriously and seek to encourage them. I was visiting a church planter a couple months ago in a far-flung place, not here in Ohio, and just stayed at their house that weekend, preached at their church, and on Saturday evening, just sitting down with the church planter and his wife and saying, how are things going? And afterwards, they said, this is the first pastoral visit we've ever had. You realize that pastors don't often get pastoral visits? I think Beth and I have had like 2 over 15 years of ministry. But yeah, church planners need that too. And so that's a big part of what we do. I'm going to pause right there and just ask what questions or comments do any of you have? Scott, go ahead.
Can you give us an update on where the denomination is? Can you give us an update on where the denomination is on converting the shorter and the longer catechisms from the Old English to modern English terms?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So that is I'll say first and foremost, that is not a home missions project, that's a denominational question. So about 10 years ago, in 2016, there was an overture brought to our General Assembly, that's the national meeting, the national body, asking the denomination to produce a study version of the shorter catechism in modern English. Over the next 2 years, that project morphed into the idea of taking all of our standards, the Confession of Faith, the larger catechism, and the shorter catechism, and updating them, officially updating that language and making it more modern English. That work took 4 years, I think, and so, or 5. In 2023, so this is just 3 years ago, that group of people that was working on it brought their results back to the General Assembly. And they were proposing about 1,200 changes in terms of language. None of it was tampering with theological words, or very little. But most of it was changing the THs to S's, the these and the thous to yous. That was at least, let's say, probably about a third was that, what we just call morphology changes, the shape of the language. But it was such a large number of changes that were being proposed all at once that what the General Assembly did was, instead of initiating a process to officially change the Constitution, which is very, very difficult in our church, as it should be, right? Just like it's hard to change the Constitution of the United States, it's hard to change the Constitution of the OPC. But instead of initiating a constitutional change at that point, the General Assembly said, let's take the work that's been done, let's make an official study version, and let's share that with the churches of the denomination for 5 years. And 5 years from now, let's revisit the question of whether to officially, formally update the official language of the standards. Is that making sense?
It's making sense. Where is that?
Where are we at? No, so good. So that study version has been out now since last year. Matthew should have, Pastor Patton should have a copy. They sent 1 or 2 copies, I think, to each church. The question will come back to the General Assembly in 2028. The 2028 General Assembly will be taking up this question of, should we take any of the changes that were in that study version and initiate a constitutional amendment process to update the language? So I know of at least one presbytery that is going to erect a committee to study it and make recommendations to the General Assembly. I think there's another presbytery that's thinking along those lines too. But that question will come back up at the national level in 2 years, or a year and a half. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
That will be very controversial, by the way, for some good reasons and maybe for some less good reasons, but there will be a lot of debate over that. Todd, you have a question?
Yeah. So you shared, I believe you said the current percentage of church plants is about 12%.
12.6.
Right. And you shared the foundation of the OPC, which was very strongly evangelistic.
Yes.
So we're 90 years later.
Yep.
And yet we are at 300 churches.
Yep.
Do we have any data on that church plant rate, say in the last 7, like from 36 to say 2000? And because just my guess without looking at the math is that it's a very slow rate that maybe is picking up now. And I'm just curious as to what happened in our history with this super strong foundation, Christ, the authority of the word, and then potentially no growth and possibly stagnation.
Very, very slow growth, yeah. I understand the question you're asking. It's a question that we've asked a lot. One of the things that has been part of our history, sadly, is that our history very early on, we had some division. You know, a year after we were established, a group of churches left. We started with 4,000 members in 1936, and the next year there was a division. It's not uncommon, you know, in a war for allies to be united against the enemy, and then once they have peace, they realize they don't agree on everything. And Christians that take doctrine really seriously have a hard time sometimes cohabitating when there's a serious doctrinal division. So there was a split early on. One of the things that's been a struggle for our church over the years is we don't have a lot of large churches. And sometimes when a church gets beyond a certain size in terms of membership, they end up leaving our church for another denomination. That's happened too many times. I think that's sad. One of the things that we've done in home missions to try to stem that is we encourage pastors of larger denominations, or larger churches, to get together and just talk about what's it like to do ministry in the OPC, which is largely a small church denomination, as a bigger church. I think you were invited to one of those. Yeah, Pastor Patton and I were both at one of those seminars, 2 years ago? Yeah. 2 years ago. But the sad reality is that sometimes churches that really flourish end up deciding they want to leave the OPC. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for less good reasons. There's a church, I'll come to you just a second, Paul. There's a church in Philadelphia, very close to where I live. Actually, it's the closest like-minded church to our house that years ago was an OPC church. But as it grew and as it flourished, and they were doing great evangelistic work and even doing some really good foreign missions work, they ran into conflict within their presbytery. And the local leadership just got to the point where they said, we want to be focused on our ministry. We don't want to be focused on this presbytery heel nipping as they perceived it. Whether that's fair or not, that's how they perceived it. So they said, we're going to move into another denomination. So that's a sad part of our history, but it's, to be honest, that's what's happened a lot. Bigger churches tend to leave or have tended to leave. We're hoping that that's not going to be the case in the future. Paul, you had a question.
I'm sure you keep track of national statistics, at least, in evangelistic outreach. For example, at Arizona Christian University is George Barna, and he provides quite a bit of stats. And so how does the OPC compare to other denominations or other evangelistic outreaches?
In terms of statistical success?
Growth.
So I do not have statistical data on that. Our growth as a denomination is very slow. It's like 1% to 2% a year overall. That's not anything to brag about, but that is the reality. One of the reasons that I was willing to leave a very comfortable and loving congregation here and take up this role is I'm not satisfied with that. I want us to grow very fruitful in reaching lost people. I can say, I don't have a statistic on this, Paul, but I hope this will encourage all of you. As I travel around the denomination and as I talk about evangelism and the importance of reaching new people with the gospel, I see people in the pews nodding. I think our church, our denomination, we want to be the tip of the spear in reaching lost people. I think a lot of times we just don't feel equipped. So one of the things that we do in home missions is we have a weekend seminar where we train people on personal evangelism. We did that here about a year ago in March. It was sort of formally for the church plant at Bread of Life, but we ended up having it here at Covenant because the logistics were easier. But for your encouragement, I see a lot of people that really want to be better at reaching lost people. They just say, well, I don't really know where to start. I don't know how to do that. There's this mindset that we have to really shift. I think many of us think of evangelism as selling something. And if you think of evangelism as selling something and you're not a salesman, you're just not going to do it. You're going to say, it's not my personality. But that's not the right way to think about evangelism. Evangelism is not selling, it is sharing what God has done for you. And even the most introverted among us will talk about the things we love with people we love. Years and years ago, I ministered to a young man who was on the spectrum. This was years ago at a former church. And he was very quiet. He's an adult now. Very quiet. Sometimes maybe a little hard to talk to, but you know what? When I started talking to him about World War II, he just lit up. He loved to talk about the thing, about this. This was important to him, right? Something that he loved, he'd studied. It was part of who he was, his interest in World War II. And it just goes to prove the point that all of us, even the most introverted, and I am a highly introverted person, don't laugh, Ryan, it's true. We can all talk about the things we love to people we love. And so one of the things that I try to just move the needle on as much as I can, don't think of evangelism as selling something. Think about it in the terms of Mark chapter 5, verse 19, where Jesus says to a man that he'd healed from a pack of demons, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. And so encouraging people just to think, how much has God done for you? What is believing in Jesus? How does that make a difference to your life right now? If you were not a Christian, how would your life be different from it is as a Christian? That is your today testimony, not just your historic testimony, but your today testimony. Share that. That's what you want to look for an opportunity to share. And if you can get out of that mindset of selling and think more about sharing, it unlocks. It really diminishes fear. I won't say it gets rid of fear. It diminishes fear. And I think that's a big key for our church growing more evangelistic. So I appreciate the question. I don't have exact stats on that, but we do get a statistical report every year, and sadly, it's like 1% growth. Like, oh man, Lord, make us more fruitful. Dan, you have a question?
So I know in the Presbytery of Ohio, we got Troy, Findlay, Louisville, Marysville. There's a lot of, like, I can just name at least 4 to 5 church works right now in this area. Is that pretty consistent among other presbyteries where they got the same path, or are we just outliers in this area?
I think the Presbytery of Ohio is second or third most active in church planting across the denomination. You know, it does vary over time. Right now, if you just track demographics, people are moving from the Northeast to the Southeast. People are moving from Southern California into Arizona. So it shouldn't surprise you that 2 very booming areas in terms of church planting and evangelism are Southeast, Carolinas, Georgia. We have a lot of church plants going on there. And the Presbytery of Southern California, which also covers Arizona, there's a lot of church planting activity in Phoenix. People are moving out of Los Angeles, out of California, into Arizona. So in some sense, as people move, demographics shift. Presbytery of Ohio does have, I think you said 4?
I was like
yeah,
4.
There's maybe a little more than that.
I know 4. Those are 4 I named off the top of my head. Like Findlay,
yeah, you got Alpha E Omega in Springfield. You've got Findlay, which is not on our support program. They're not quite at that level yet. You've got Bread of Life, which is on our support program. You've got Louisville, which is partly on our support program at this point. Am I missing any others?
Marysville is up.
Marysville, right.
Yeah.
Marysville is going to be coming on our support program probably this fall. So, yeah, Presbytery of Ohio is very active in church planting, which is good for me. Do you know why?
Because you have a lot of family in this area.
Yeah, so I have reasons to travel to Ohio. It's not wrong when work and pleasure happen to coincide. God knows it's not that often, right?
Yeah.
So, no, we're very excited about what's happening in the Presbytery of Ohio and thankful for it. Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Paul. I'll come to Gabrielle.
Growth of any institution or organization, and people are thinking about it, talking about it, immediately goes to new people coming in, which is all we've been talking about now with regard to evangelization and so on. Very understandable, and churches, of course, ought to be oriented that way. Beside that is this whole other often overlooked factor of retention, and especially children, young people coming up. You'd expect there to be a growth rate, even if you brought in no new converts ever. You'd expect there to be a growth rate more than 1%, simply from that population growth internally. So, is the home mission have that on the radar? Is there any consideration given to that? Is there any thoughts or initiatives related to that?
Yeah, so I would suggest to you that the 2 questions are not as unrelated as they may first appear. So what Paul is saying is that even if we were not seeing brand new converts, we have children that are being raised. Why aren't they adding to the population of the church? And part of it is many of them are walking out the back door whenever they grow up. I grew up in an OPC church that at its peak had more than 200 people on Sundays. It went through a period where it was pretty large. There was a youth group of probably 24 kids my age, And other than my wife and I, very few of them are still walking with the Lord. There was some serious spiritual attrition there. Why is that? Well, some of it is a failure of discipleship. We need to own that. And we do have another committee at the national level, the Committee on Christian Education, which is specially charged with discipleship resources, Sunday school curriculum, publications for discipleship. But I would suggest that the questions are not unrelated. Whenever we profess a faith, like the Christian faith, that cares about discipling the nations and reaching out, and then we as congregations don't do that, our young people see that. They say there's hypocrisy. You don't really believe this stuff. And that's not the only answer, but that's a part of the answer. If they don't see us taking seriously the gospel mandate, then what are we? Are we just a culture club? Are we just, what are we here for? And there are young people that when the church fails in its witness to the world, more young people than we think see that and say Christianity is hypocritical, and they walk out the back door. So I don't think the questions are unrelated. I do think we can get better at discipling, and that's a piece of it as well. But I think part of our discipleship is also modeling a serious concern for the lost, which is an area where we need to grow as a denomination. I don't know, is that it? You have a follow-up, Paul?
Lots of other churches happily are oriented to evangelism. So there's a world of opportunities for young people who are looking for churches that are evangelism oriented that land someplace else. So is that fine? I mean, is that
No, I don't think that's fine. The Great Commission says, go into all the world and make disciples and teach them. It's not, you don't get to pick one half. Churches that are only oriented toward evangelism are failing in discipleship. Churches that only want to emphasize discipleship are failing in evangelism. We don't get to pick and choose the mission.
What I mean is, if we succeed in, to the extent that we succeed in having this evangelistic impulse and living it out in life in the church, doesn't set us apart. I mean, set us apart from another OPC church that doesn't do that, but it doesn't set us apart from bunches of other churches that have equal or greater zeal for that.
Okay.
And OPC young people may be leaving not just the faith, but leaving the OPC and landing in other churches.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious as to whether that's given any attention, as to any attempt has been made to get at the why behind that. You suggested a why. Yeah.
Yeah, I've suggested one why. I think there are perhaps other reasons. It's complicated. I don't know that there's any. It's very hard to get great data on that question, because a lot of times people that leave, they don't want to talk to you about why they're leaving, or if they do, they might not tell you the truth. Right? Those of us, and I know you've served in church leadership as well, Paul, in the past. That those of us who serve in church leadership are very familiar with the phenomenon of somebody leaving the church and they say, "Well, I'm really mad about X," and then 3 to 6 months later, you find out there was this whole other thing going on that they never disclosed. And so, getting an accurate picture of why people leave the denomination, I think, is difficult. It's a good question. I appreciate that question. Dan, you've got another one?
I know some of the pockets, like, for instance, PCA is usually pretty heavy in the South because of where the origins came up from, more southern. And I know there's some pockets of conservative EPC churches, or some other Nate Park churches, that are around, and I think they're doing some stuff. And I'm sure we're partnering with the more alignment-oriented stuff, but I know I look in Indiana. I live in Indiana, and the OPC has got one church there, maybe a couple by Chicago. Or when I'm traveling, I look for churches, and it's hard to find OPC churches in certain pockets of so I know that some of it. I'm hoping that the people that leave, they move to areas where there's a strong other thing. But what type of things are coming alongside with these other NAPARC churches for planting? What other things, are we seeing? Or is it, I know we're not on the island, but are we partnering with these other denominations in different pockets? Or I wouldn't say there's no-go set, but if a good PCA presbytery is doing good things, there may not be a need for us in that area.
Right. No, we are serious about two things. We're serious about our ecumenical relationships with other like-minded churches. We take that very seriously. We're also serious about believing that the Lord has baked some stuff into our denomination that is distinctive, and we think we have, by God's grace, we think we have a lot to offer as well. So one of the things that we do is we do cooperate very, very closely with sister denominations in all areas: home missions, foreign missions, and Christian education resources. When I served overseas, the official term is seconded. I was seconded to a PCA team. I was an OPC missionary, but I was working under a PCA team because we work closely on that field. In our home missions work, we do work very closely with our other like-minded church brethren. In fact, every year when we have our church planting conference, we extend invitations to a couple of our sister denominations and say, hey, send some church planters if you want. 2 years ago, we had the brand new executive director of a sister denomination. He came to our church planting conference just to check it out. He was just starting the job, wanted to see what we did. He came, and a PCA leader also came. We had some of their leadership there. Next week, when I go to South Carolina to meet with seminary students, the day after that, I'm going to be spending some time with one of my counterparts in another denomination, just catching up, meeting. So we do confer home missions, foreign missions, and in Christian education with our discipleship resources. The Sunday school curriculum that I think you guys use Great Commissions here, right? That's produced by the OPC and the PCA together. The Trinity hymnal that you use here in the pews, that's produced by the PCA and the OPC together. The Psalter hymnal that's used at Bread of Life, that was produced by the OPC and a denomination called the United Reformed Churches together. And I don't know if this news has made it to you all yet, but it's been publicly announced. The PCA and the OPC are going to be working on a third edition of the Trinity hymnal. That'll be coming out in the next couple years. So there is active cooperation. That doesn't mean, just like here in Dayton, you have both OP churches and PCA churches. It's not that we never have congregations in the same city, but even, especially in home missions, church planting, I'm very aware of this, that if the OPC or the PCA is planning to plant a church in a city where the other denomination already has churches, we have a rule, an agreement that we always talk to one another first. Say, hey, we're thinking of coming into Dayton. We know there's a PCA church here. How do you feel about this? The church that I planted years ago, State College, Pennsylvania, there was already a big PCA church. So before I ever got on the ground, the people that were leading the work went and met with the pastor and the leadership there and said, hey, we're thinking about planting an OP church here. How do you feel about it? And they made sure that it's not that we need their permission, but we want to be good neighbors. We want to love them. And they don't need our permission either, but we like it when they come and talk to us. If the PCA were going to plant a church in Englewood, you hope that they would talk to the session here, right? So we do cooperate. Scott, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, recognizing that the PCA is 10 times larger than we are.
Yep.
When I first became a Christian many years ago, it was through the PCA. And at that time, they had a very formal process for church planting, and in particular, those ministers or potential ministers and their wives in training them, in educating them, in preparing them for the pressures and the realities of being a church planter. That, frankly, is quite different than an established church and pastoring an established church. So my question to you is around that idea, not to say that that's the right idea, and it sounds like we've got a formal conference that you do on a yearly basis. Theirs was a week-long process. I'm not sure if they even do that anymore.
They still do, yep.
What are your thoughts around that idea and helping our new ministers and their wives to be able to function well in those roles that they're about to take on?
Yeah, so what Scott's referring to is our sister denomination, the PCA, has what they call an assessment center. So potential church planter candidates and their wives go, and they're I've never been, so I don't know exactly what goes on, but they're put through a process that is meant to assess them. And that assessment is handled at the denominational level. We don't have anything like that. And historically, our denomination is leery of too much centralization of power. So what we have done, though, as a committee is we have written up guidelines that we think every church planter should, that certain gifts that should be observable, certain qualities, and we have given those to the presbyteries. And we have said to them, when you are proposing to us a church planter, we would like you to formally write up your assessment of the man based on these characteristics. So we're not the gatekeepers on that, but we're asking the presbyteries to take that seriously. So the idea underneath all of this, however you do it, is not bad. That there are the OPC's formal book of church order recognizes that there are kind of two types of pastors. There are the farmers, those who are really good at caring for an existing congregation, which even that is not as easy as it looks, trust me. And then you have the fishermen, who are more gifted at going and gathering and starting new things, but maybe a little less gifted in the long-term sustainable maintenance and care. So in my mind, I think of the fishermen and the farmers. And so the qualifications that we pass on to our presbyteries, we're giving them a set of what we think, this is what identifies a minister as a fisherman. Would you please work through these questions and think honestly about this particular man. Is he a fisherman or is he a farmer? If he is a farmer, it's probably not a great idea to make him a church planter. We should rather help him find a call to a church that needs a pastor. And by the way, we have like 24 vacant pulpits in our denomination right now is at about 10% pastoral vacancy. There are plenty of opportunities in existing churches that need a pastor. So not being a fisherman is not a sin, right? It just means, honestly, my gifts lie in this other area. Let's put you in a place where you can thrive. But the men that are more geared toward that fisherman mentality, they're gatherers, right? We want to try to move them. But to answer your question, we don't do it at the national level. We write up some guidelines, but we rely on the presbyteries. Some of that's OPC culture. We're just leery of centralization. Do you have a follow-up? I know Paul wants to ask a question too.
Just quickly, is there anything that you're doing to support the wives in this area?
Oh yeah. So our wives come to the Church Planter Conference, and we have a separate track for them. Our denominational committee on ministerial care also has a full-time employee. She's full-time, right? Annika's full-time. Annika Fesco, she's a full-time resource and encourager for pastors' wives across the denomination. And she comes to our Church Planter Conference and does some special sessions there, which I'm not invited to attend. It's exclusionary, in a good way. Paul, you had a question.
Yeah, so the last Presbyterian that I ever heard that spoke forcefully on current events, hard issues, was D. James Kennedy. Now we have Albert Mohler, and we have a ton of podcasters that are known influencers. Where's the OPC or our guy?
Where's the OPC in terms of social commentary?
Yeah. I mean, talking on hard issues, not going over the Westminster Confession of Faith. We're applying it. How do we apply it today?
I hear what you're saying, Paul. I think the answer is your guy is in your pulpit every Sunday. I've heard, it's been a while since I've heard Pastor Patton preach, but I know that he tried to talk to the heart and tried to make real life connections. And if the observation is that the OPC doesn't have any sort of social media influencers of the same stature as Al Mohler, that's a fair observation. I'm not sure it's a flaw. It might be a feature. That's maybe a conversation offline, but.
Talking about hard issues, I mean, not just call church and faith, they're talking about hard issues that the gospel applies to.
Yeah.
And that's what you're listening.
Okay, so I hear what you're asking, and then the reason the hard issue is hard is because there might be more than one biblical answer. And the social media culture of our day, we want the dictators of conscience who will tell us exactly what to think on every little issue. And the reality is sometimes the Christian answer is more nuanced. And so I think the OPC rightly shows some restraint where other denominations and other pundits do not. And maybe we show, you could argue, do we show too much restraint? Perhaps, but I think that's a feature rather than a flaw. I would rather if somebody's going to come into my church, or our churches, and I know we need to wrap up here, so this will be the last thing. I would rather them be offended because of what we've said about Jesus than what we've said about a secondary issue. Now, eventually, if they come to know Jesus, they might still be upset about my view on a secondary issue. Or they might come to know Jesus and actually take a different view on that secondary issue based on their faith in Christ. Like, that is possible. So, of course, the thing that makes it hard is that for each of us, it's sometimes hard to distinguish between a primary and a secondary issue. I feel like the Bible is so clear about X that every Christian must embrace this view. And if they don't, I start to wonder whether they're a Christian. Like, that's something we all need to be honest about. We can do that. I think it's wise that our denomination in general shows a little more restraint there, rather than simply becoming a dictator of conscience. We have enough of those in the world. I don't think we need more. So, Pastor Patton, can I share with you a couple prayer requests?
Oh, yeah. I was just about to say we should pray.
So you'll see this in next month's New Horizons, but 3 prayer requests that I pray every day for our church is that we would be as fruitful in reaching the lost as in welcoming the found. Not one or the other, both. That the Lord would save new souls every day through our church, directly or indirectly. And because we need more pastors, church planters, and missionaries, that the Lord would raise up the next generation. If you would
awesome.
Pray for us, it'd be
great request. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the work of home missions. Thank you for raising up Jeremiah and other wonderful leaders in our denomination who are spearheading this and encouraging us to stay focused on how we can reach the lost and fulfill the Great Commission. We do pray that we would be focused on that Great Commission and that we would be fruitful in reaching the lost as well as discipling those whom you have found. And we do pray that you would continue to help us as Christians to be bold in our witness to unbelievers in our lives, and that our witness would be both in word and in deed, that people would really see Jesus in us. And we do pray you would raise up laborers for the harvest field, and that, Lord, you be pleased to establish the work of church planters. We think especially of Pastor Dave and his laborers even now to plant this church in Troy. We pray you would establish that work and cause it to be so fruitful that in time it would be establishing other new church plants too. We love you, Lord, and we're so thankful for all the ways you're at work, even through us. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.